How to build on a low income. Machiavelli's 10 brutal strategies. Hook. Stop scrolling. This one is for the person who is tired of being told that building wealth requires wealth to begin with. This is for the person working with less than enough, dreaming of more than they currently have, and wondering if the gap between where they are and where they want to be is actually crossable. It is in a man who lived 500 years ago, a man who was imprisoned, tortured, exiled, and left with nothing, figured out exactly how. If this channel speaks to something real in you, subscribe right now and hit that bell. Because every week we translate the wisdom of history's greatest minds into strategies you can actually use. Now let us get into it. Opening. Niccolò Machiavelli was not born into power. He was not handed his position. He built his influence, his knowledge, and his reputation through decades of deliberate, strategic, relentless effort, in one of the most dangerous and competitive environments in human history, Renaissance Italy, where political miscalculation did not cost you your job. It cost you your life. And then he lost everything anyway. He was arrested, tortured on the strappato, a device that dislocated shoulders repeatedly, stripped of his government position. Exiled to a small farm with barely enough to survive. By any external measure, he was finished. He was not finished. From that farm, from that poverty, from that humiliation, he wrote The Prince, the book that would be read by kings and presidents and strategists for 5 centuries. He built his most enduring legacy from the lowest point of his life, with the fewest resources he had ever possessed. That is what we are studying today. Not Machiavelli the myth, not Machiavelli the villain that lazy readings have constructed. We are studying Machiavelli the builder, the strategist who understood that resources are never the primary factor in what a person can accomplish. Strategy is thinking as the ruthless, clear-eyed, unsentimental discipline of someone who refuses to let their current circumstances define their final destination. These are 10 brutal strategies for building on a low income, drawn from Machiavelli's philosophy, his history, and the timeless principles that separate those who rise from those who remain exactly where they started. The first strategy: master your current position before seeking a new one. Machiavelli wrote that the man who tries to hold too many positions at once holds none of them well. This is the first and perhaps most violated principle in the psychology of people with low income and high ambition. The temptation, and it is a powerful one, is to escape the current situation as fast as possible. To look away from the present circumstance, because the present circumstance is painful, and to pour all energy into some imagined future state. The problem is that the habits, the skills, and the thinking patterns you bring to the next level are being formed right now. In how you handle your current job, in how you manage your current money, in how you show up in your current responsibilities. Machiavelli observed that princes who inherited stable kingdoms and still lost them did so not because of bad fortune but because of bad habits formed in times of comfort. The reverse is also true. People who build empires from nothing do so because they formed extraordinary habits in exactly the kind of difficult, constrained, uncomfortable circumstances you may be sitting in right now. Master your current position, not because it is your final destination, because it is your training ground. The discipline you build managing $50 is the same discipline that will manage 50,000. The excellence you bring to a job that does not feel worthy of your excellence is the muscle memory of excellence that will carry you when the stakes are higher. Do not wait for better circumstances to become your best self. Become your best self now, in these circumstances. That is how Machiavelli survived exile. Not by waiting for Florence to call him back. By becoming so formidable, so knowledgeable, so refined in his thinking that when the call eventually came, he was ready. The second strategy: control what you spend before you try to control what you earn. Machiavelli understood something about power that most people never apply to their personal finances. The person who depends on others for their survival has no real power at all. He wrote that mercenary forces, armies paid by someone else, are always dangerous because their loyalty is conditional on continued payment. The moment the money runs out, the loyalty runs out. Your expenses are your mercenaries. Every fixed cost, every recurring payment, everything you have purchased on credit and must now service, these are loyalties that belong to someone else. And as long as more of your income is committed before you receive it than remains freely yours, you are not building. You are maintaining someone else's position. This is brutal but necessary. On a low income, the most powerful financial move available to you is not a side hustle. It is not an investment. It is the relentless, unsentimental reduction of what you owe and what you spend. Every dollar freed from a recurring obligation is a dollar that joins your side. Every expense cut is a miniature act of financial independence. Machiavelli admired rulers who built strong internal economies, who developed their own resources rather than depending on taxation of others or foreign loans. Think of your budget in the same terms. Build a strong internal economy. Know every outflow. Question every recurring charge. Distinguish ruthlessly between what you need and what you have been marketed into believing you need. The freedom to build requires margin. And margin, on a low income, is created by controlling the outflow before you obsess over increasing the inflow. Both matter. But sequence matters, and this comes first. The third strategy: invest in knowledge before you invest in anything else. Machiavelli spent his years in exile reading. Every night, he described in his letter to Vittori, he would enter his study and spend hours in conversation with the great men of antiquity, absorbing their strategies, understanding their failures, extracting what was universally true about power, about human nature, about what worked and what did not across centuries of recorded history. He had very little money. He had no political position. He had no capital to invest, no connections to leverage, no platform from which to speak. What he had was his mind. And he invested in it with the same intensity that a wealthy man might invest in property. This is the great equalizer that most low-income people underestimate. Knowledge, in the modern world, has never been more accessible or more affordable. The gap between what a person with no money can learn and what a person with significant wealth can learn is narrower than it has ever been in human history. Libraries are free. The internet is nearly free. Podcasts, videos, books, the cost of acquiring knowledge that could change your entire economic trajectory is within reach of almost anyone. But access is not enough. You must treat knowledge as your primary investment. Before entertainment, before comfort, before the things that feel good in the short term but contribute nothing to where you are going. An hour each day, just 1 hour, of deliberate, focused learning in a field that can increase your value is, over 5 years, the equivalent of over 1,800 hours of compounding expertise. Machiavelli became the most influential political thinker of the Renaissance not because he was born brilliant, but because he was relentlessly, systematically educated. You have the same option. Use it. The fourth strategy: build alliances, not dependencies. One of Machiavelli's most repeated and misunderstood teachings is about the nature of alliances. He distinguished sharply between the prince who builds genuine alliances, relationships of mutual benefit, trust, and shared interest, and the prince who creates dependencies, either in others or in himself. Dependencies are fragile, alliances are durable. In practical terms, on a low income, this is the difference between building a network and building a support system. A support system is people who give to you. An alliance is people who build with you. The support system feels good in the short term but creates a dynamic of dependency that limits your agency. The alliance is harder to build but produces something that compounds: shared resources, shared knowledge, shared opportunity. This means being intentional about who you spend time with. Machiavelli observed that a ruler is known by the quality of the people he surrounds himself with. And the people around you, whether you have chosen them consciously or simply accumulated them through proximity, are shaping your thinking, your habits, your ambitions, and your sense of what is possible every single day. On a low income, social capital is often the only capital immediately available. The question is whether you are building social capital strategically, cultivating relationships with people who are building something, who think expansively, who have skills that complement yours, or whether you are simply maintaining the social environment you inherited, which may or may not be aligned with where you are trying to go. You do not need to abandon your roots. Machiavelli was loyal to Florence his entire life. But you do need to add relationships, deliberately, with people who challenge and expand you. Build alliances. They are worth more than almost any financial investment available to you. The fifth strategy: turn constraint into creativity. Here is something Machiavelli understood that most people with resources never discover: constraint is not the enemy of creativity. It is the engine of it. When Machiavelli had unlimited access to the resources of the Florentine government, he produced competent diplomatic work. When he was exiled, stripped of everything, confined to a farm, he wrote The Prince. The limitation forced a depth of thinking that abundance had not required. This is not romanticization of poverty. Poverty is genuinely difficult and the goal is to move through it, not celebrate it. But within the reality of limited resources, there is an available shift in perspective that changes everything. The question changes from, what could I do if I had more? To, what is the most powerful thing I can do with exactly what I have right now? The first question paralyzes. It puts your agency in the future, in the hands of circumstances that have not yet arrived. The second question activates. It puts your agency in the present, in the hands of the one person actually available to act. You, now, with this. Every constraint you currently face, limited money, limited time, limited connections, limited equipment, is a design challenge. It is asking you to be creative in ways that people without the constraint will never discover. The person who learns to market without money develops skills the person with a large marketing budget never needs to develop. The person who builds a network without status learns the art of genuine human connection that the person who buys their way into rooms never masters. Constraint makes you resourceful, and resourcefulness, not resources, is what Machiavelli identified as the true mark of the leader who will endure. The sixth strategy: play the long game without losing the present. Machiavelli wrote about the distinction between the short game and the long game with surgical precision. He observed that many rulers made brilliant short-term gains through cruelty or cunning, only to find that those gains had undermined the long-term foundations they needed. He also observed the opposite failure: rulers so focused on some distant ideal that they neglected the practical necessities of the present moment and were destroyed before the long game even began. The application to building on a low income is direct. The long game is essential. Without a vision of where you are going and the willingness to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term position, you will never build anything that lasts. But the long game must be funded by present-tense action. Not someday action. Not when the circumstances improve action. Today action. This means choosing one thing, one skill, one income stream, one asset, and building it over a sustained period of time while simultaneously managing the immediate necessities of your actual life. Not one or the other. Both. The discipline to handle what today requires while simultaneously making deposits, however small, into the future you are building. Small deposits compound. The $10 invested this month matters less for its monetary value than for the habit it is building. The habit of someone who invests, who defers, who is thinking forward even in tight circumstances. The hour of learning this week matters less for what it immediately produces than for the identity it is reinforcing. The identity of someone who is building, even when no one can see it yet. Machiavelli played a very long game. He waited years in exile. He never stopped building. And when his moment came, he was ready because he had not wasted the waiting. The seventh strategy: protect your reputation as a strategic asset. In Machiavelli's world, reputation was not vanity. It was infrastructure. A ruler with a strong reputation required fewer soldiers to defend their territory, because potential enemies calculated the cost of conflict against the known quantity of a formidable opponent. A ruler with a damaged reputation required greater resources to hold the same ground, because every adversary sensed an opportunity. Your reputation functions identically in the modern economy. Particularly on a low income, where your financial capital is limited, your reputation, what people say about you when you are not in the room, the reliability you are known for, the quality of work associated with your name, the character people assume when they hear your name, is often your most valuable asset. And it compounds in both directions. A reputation for reliability, for excellence, for integrity opens doors that money cannot buy. It creates opportunities before you have the credentials to expect them. It generates trust faster than any marketing strategy. On a low income, where you cannot outspend competitors, you can absolutely out-reputation them. You can be the person who does what they say, who delivers more than expected, who shows up with consistency that people come to count on. This means treating every interaction, every piece of work, every commitment made and kept or broken, as a deposit into or withdrawal from a reputational account that is being continuously audited by the people around you. Machiavelli said it plainly: everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you actually are. Make what you appear to be and what you actually are the same thing. That alignment is rare, and rarity, in any market, commands premium. The eighth strategy: never neutralize your own ambition. This strategy is the one that cuts deepest, because it addresses the internal sabotage that most low-income builders eventually encounter, often without realizing it is happening. Machiavelli wrote that the greatest danger to a prince is not external enemies. It is the internal collapse of will, the gradual accommodation to circumstances, the slow shrinkage of ambition to match the size of current reality, the subtle and devastating decision to stop wanting more because wanting more is painful when you cannot immediately have it. This internal collapse has many voices. It sounds like realism. It sounds like maturity. It sounds like the wisdom of accepting what is, but Machiavelli would identify it as something else entirely, the neutralization of the very force that could carry you forward. Low income creates real psychological pressure toward the shrinking of ambition. When the gap between where you are and where you want to be is wide, and the daily experience of that gap is exhausting, the mind looks for relief. And one of the reliefs available is to want less. To decide that the thing you wanted is not really that important. To convince yourself that your current situation is acceptable when your gut knows it is not. Guard your ambition the way you guard anything precious. Not the anxious, comparison-driven ambition that measures itself against other people's timelines and achievements. But the deep, quiet, personal ambition that knows what it is building and why. The ambition that does not need to broadcast itself because it is too busy working. The ambition that survives discouragement because it is rooted in something true about who you are and what you are here to do. Machiavelli never stopped wanting Florence back. That wanting, sustained through torture and exile and years of apparent failure, is what produced the prince. Your ambition, kept alive through the lean years, is what will produce your masterpiece. The ninth strategy: move decisively when the moment arrives. Machiavelli's concept of fortuna, fortune, was not passive. He did not see opportunity as something that simply arrived and waited politely for you to be ready. He described fortune as a river in flood, powerful, indifferent, moving fast. The person who had built embankments could channel it, the person who had not was swept away. Opportunity, on a low income, often appears in forms that do not look like opportunity. It appears as the uncomfortable conversation that could lead to a better position. It appears as the project no one else wants to take on that would give you skills you do not currently have. It appears as the connection made in an unexpected context that could open a door you did not know existed. It appears briefly, often without announcement, and it does not negotiate with people who are not ready to move. This strategy has two components that must function together. The first is the preparation, building the skills, the relationships, the financial margin, the knowledge, so that when opportunity appears, you have something to bring to it. The second is the decisiveness, the willingness, when the moment comes, to actually move. To say yes before you feel fully ready. To take the risk before you have eliminated all uncertainty. Because certainty, in the context of real opportunity, is almost never available. What is available is a moment where the probability is favorable and the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of action. Machiavelli watched leaders miss their moments because they deliberated too long. He watched others seize moments they were not perfectly prepared for and succeed anyway because they moved with full commitment. Fortune, he wrote, favors the bold, not the reckless, the bold, the deliberate, prepared, courageous bold. Your moment will come, be ready, and when it comes, move. The 10th strategy: define victory on your own terms. This is where Machiavelli diverges most sharply from the culture of social media, of comparison, of measuring your progress against other people's highlight reels. He was deeply pragmatic about outcomes, but the outcomes he cared about were specific, defined, personal. He was not trying to be the most powerful man in Italy. He was trying to restore Florence's independence and contribute to her flourishing. His definition of victory was his own. Without your own definition of victory, you will spend your life winning other people's games and wondering why the winning feels hollow. You will reach income levels that looked impressive from below and find that the feeling does not match the number. You will accumulate things that the culture told you to want and feel the gap between possession and satisfaction. Define it now. What does building on a low income actually mean for you? What is the specific, concrete, personally meaningful outcome that would tell you that you have succeeded? Not the vague aspiration. Not, I want to be comfortable, or, I want to be free. The specific vision, the number that represents financial security for your actual life, not someone else's. The work that would make you feel genuinely useful and engaged. The life that fits who you actually are rather than who the algorithm thinks you should want to be. Machiavelli died in relative obscurity, never having regained his former position in Florence. By most external measures, he failed. But he had produced work of such enduring power that it shaped the thinking of leaders for 5 centuries after his death. He had built something real, something that lasted. By his own measure, contribution to political understanding, to the honest study of power and human nature, he succeeded magnificently. Build towards something that is yours. Measure your progress against your own definition. And let that definition be worthy of you, ambitious enough to require your best, honest enough to reflect what you actually value, and specific enough to know when you have arrived. The integration. Why these 10 strategies form a single system. None of these strategies works in isolation. Machiavelli never thought in isolated tactics, he thought in systems. A ruler who built alliances but could not move decisively when the moment came would lose the opportunity those alliances created. A ruler who moved boldly but had not invested in knowledge would make bold, uninformed mistakes. A ruler who controlled their spending but neutralized their ambition would achieve security and stagnation simultaneously. These 10 strategies are a system. They are designed to work together, reinforcing each other, filling each other's gaps. The knowledge you invest in informs the decisiveness of your moves. The alliances you build create the opportunities that reward your preparation. The constraint-driven creativity produces the reputation that opens doors. The long game gives meaning to the discipline of present-tense action. The protection of your ambition provides the fuel that all the other strategies require. You do not need to implement all 10 simultaneously. Machiavelli would caution against that. Trying to change everything at once is how people change nothing. Begin where the pull is strongest. Begin with the strategy that landed most directly on something real in your situation. Implement it fully. Let it become habitual. Then add the next. Building on a low income is not a sprint. It is not a lottery. It is not waiting for a break. It is the slow, strategic, relentless accumulation of advantages, knowledge, relationships, habits, reputation, margin, clarity of purpose, until the accumulated weight of those advantages begins to tip the scales in a direction that might look, from the outside, like luck. It is not luck, it is Machiavelli's formula, applied by someone like you, in circumstances like these, with the specific and irreplaceable combination of your mind, your will, and your refusal to let your current income determine your final destination. Closing. What history owes to the people who built from nothing? The most enduring things ever built were built by people who started with less than they needed. Machiavelli had torture and exile. Marcus Aurelius had an empire collapsing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Epictetus was born into slavery. The great builders of history did not wait for favorable conditions. They looked at unfavorable conditions and decided that the conditions were not the point. They were the point. Their thinking was the point. Their refusal was the point. You are that person, not in some vague, motivational sense, in the specific, practical, Machiavellian sense of someone who understands that strategy matters more than resources, that preparation creates the luck that looks like luck, that the person who masters their current position with the same energy they would bring to their dream position is the person who eventually gets to occupy their dream position. The low income is not the story. It is the opening chapter. What happens next is being determined right now, not by the economy, not by your background, not by the circumstances of your birth or your current bank balance. It is being determined by whether you think like a strategist, act like a builder, and hold on to your ambition with both hands through every season that tries to take it from you. Machiavelli built a legacy from a farm in exile with no money, no position, and no guarantee that anyone would ever read a word he wrote. He wrote anyway. He built anyway. He remained formidable anyway. So can you. Subscribe. Call to action. If this hit differently, if you watched this whole video and felt something shift in how you see your current situation, then I need you to do one thing before you close this screen. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because every single week, we take the minds of history's greatest philosophers, strategists, and thinkers and we extract what is actually usable for your actual life. Not theory, not inspiration that evaporates by morning. Strategy, wisdom, the kind of thinking that changes the way you move. We are building a community here. People who refuse to let their circumstances be their ceiling. People who believe that thinking clearly and acting strategically can close the gap between where they are and where they are capable of being. You belong in this community. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who is building from a hard place right now and needs to hear that the hard place is not the end of the story. I will see you in the next one. Keep building. The income is temporary. The strategy is forever. Build accordingly.